Hello there and welcome to another exciting episode of the AfCFTA Podcast. Now, I trust that you have enjoyed our episodes so far. We've been talking a lot about the negotiation stages of the AfCFTA, the journey of the AfCFTA, and the state of play of the AfCFTA. Just the last episode of the AfCFTA Podcast, we talked a lot about the payment systems across the countries on the continent of Africa through the Pan-African payment and settlement systems, where commercial banks are ensuring that payments of goods and services are being made easy and simple across countries on the continent of Africa without having to convert to a third currency, however, using the currencies of the various countries on the continent of Africa. Now, you would agree with me that it is the private sector that does business. It is the private sector that makes payments for goods and services. And the private sector and businesses are deemed to be the ones that are going to drive the implementation of the AfCFTA. So let me hint you that in the coming episodes on this platform, we will be engaging businesses in the private sector who are taking advantage of the AfCFTA and harnessing the opportunities that the AfCFTA presents. We will be talking to the businesses who are trading and making payments across the continent of Africa, the challenges they face, the difficulties that they are encountering, and the successes that they are chalking doing business on the continent of Africa. All will be happening on this platform. That's why we encourage you to continue to share our links with your parties across the continent of Africa and follow how the continent is creating a single market step at a time. Now, this week, we are going to engage the private sector. We're going to listen to the private sector, their concerns, and the role they seek to play, or they have been playing in driving the implementation agenda of the AfCFTA across the continent of Africa. I caught up with the president of the Africa Business Council, Dr. Amany Asfour, at the recently held IATF 2025 in Algeria, to talk a lot about the private sector and what they envision the continent to look like in terms of doing business using the AfCFTA in the near future. Please take a listen. Dr. Amany, it's a pleasure to have you.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
Welcome to the AfCFTA Podcast.
Thank you.
Good. Now, you represent the Africa Business Council, right? What is the Africa Business Council?
Fantastic. So my brother, the Africa Business Council, is established within the same decision summit of establishing the AfCFTA for boosting our intra-Africa trade. It's established by the heads of state to be the private sector arm of African Union, the voice of the African private sector, and our founding vision is a competitive, borderless, innovative Africa for trade, investment, and industrialization. So if we're talking about trade, we cannot do it except if we really integrate it with investment and industrialization. Good. So the Africa Business Council is actually comprising of all the RECs, business councils, chambers of commerce, private sector federations, union of industries, manufacturing association. So on our board, there is COMESA Business Council, West Africa Chambers of Commerce, East Africa Chambers of Commerce, Pan-African Manufacturing Association, SADC Business Council, Pan-African Chamber of Commerce. So it's consisting of the existing structures of the private sector to collaborate with each other and to implement our plan of action that is based on the operationalization of AfCFTA. So how does Africa Business Council work? Actually, we have a strategy, we call it the triad of empowerment, which really based on 3 pillars. The first pillar is private sector strengthening, including SMEs, women and youth. Because if we want to trade among ourselves, we need to empower our private sector. We need to see how we give them information, training, capacity building, train them on how to trade under AfCFTA, give them information on the existing facilities that can help them. The second pillar is about policy advocacy. And as you rightly said, the government have political will, but we need the policies, the procedures to implement those policies, and to see how we are able to get enabling environment for the private sector, enabling environment for the investors, preferential, as I put 100 times lines, treatment for the African private sector. So one of the recommendations that we took as African Union Private Sector Forum that we are leading with African Union is to have at least 40% of all government procurement goes to African private sector, including SMEs, women and youth. What does this mean? This means that when I have something on the African soil, we should not bring it from outside the African soil. So if we talk about trade, we have, for instance, medical consumer supplies. In Egypt, we have 400 industries of medical consumer supplies. Why I bring from outside the continent? Why? So in order to implement this, we need to make a mapping exercise. What's existing on the continent? Which products are there? And what raw materials is there, so we are able to invest in it to make it an end product of Africa. Again, financial inclusion, which is very important. We need to really finance our SMEs or our private sector to be able to meet those tenders. Because if they don't have finance, they cannot meet these tenders. So again, this is something that we hadn't taken over because, for instance, in Kenya, when I was chair of Commerce Council, we pushed to have at least 30% of government procurement goes to SMEs, women and youth. And they added on with people with disabilities. But in order to meet the tender, they need to train them to meet the requirements and to have finance for this requirement. The third pillar is really about product development, which is industrialization. How we add value for our raw materials, for value addition, beneficiation, and industrialization. To do this, we have to link the raw materials with the scientific research and technology so that we are able to have industrial designs, economic zones, business incubators, business development centers, accelerators to see how we really link the industrial policies and the industrial design to have a made in Africa product which is competitive, standardized, value added, high quality, certified. All those is important to have a made in Africa product which we can trade among ourselves. Of course, the issues of logistics, again, is very important, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's really about the non-tariff barriers, the tariff barriers. But the major objective really of how Africa Business Council is there is to raise the voices of all the private sectors and to implement the AfCFTA. So under Africa Business Council, we have 25 clusters. That speaks for what? Trade, investment, energy, agriculture, infrastructure, mineral resources development. And now, as you can see that all the world is really fighting for Africa's minerals. How are we going to add value to our minerals? Not to export it as raw material, but as an end product. With the lithium batteries, by 2030, we'll have about need of 300 million electrical cars. Who is going to manufacture the lithium batteries? So it's very important that under each cluster, we really integrate all the private sector in this cluster from across the continent. And to see, if we talk about minerals, what mineral present, what industries come out of this mineral, what is the investment opportunities that's needed, what is the technology needed, what are the finance needed so that we have an end product. And again, market access. When I have a finished product, how we can have access to the market, whether it's regional or international. That's why, again, with Africa Business Council, we are collaborating for Africa Caribbean to make sure that we have new markets and to link with our sisters and brothers on the other side of the Atlantic. We are also leading with the Europe-Africa Business Summit, with all Africa, Turkey, Africa, China, Africa, USA. So again, we as the private sector of the continent, collaborating with the AfCFTA Secretariat because nobody can work alone.
Yes.
And so the AfCFTA really has put a great coordination mechanism, which is the private sector engagement platform, which could bring everybody together, even those who are still a small business organization, national chambers of commerce, private sector federation, how we bring all of us together with the guidance of the Secretariat, with the integration of all the existing structures to see how we push forward. We have already put a plan of action with the Secretariat to see how we implement it together, and to see how we make sensitization, awareness. I mean, if we go now to the cross-border women traders on the ground and ask them, do you know something about ACFTA? They don't know. Same happened for COMESA, Simplified Trade Regime. When I was chair of COMESA, Women in Business, I went to the borders between Zambia and Zimbabwe, Egypt and Sudan, Ethiopia and Djibouti. I asked the cross-border women traders, do you know anything about Simplified Trade Regime of COMESA? They did not know anything. So this is, again, one of the plan of action, how to make sensitization and awareness about ACFTA and have outreach to everybody, leaving no one behind. So coming together, my brother, is the most important mechanism to implement ACFTA.
Great. And that last bit is very important for me. The awareness creation, particularly among cross-border women traders across the continent. Because like you rightly said, it's not just in COMESA. You go to ECOWAS, you go to ECA. The women who are leading trade on the continent of Africa, the young people who are leading trade on the continent of Africa, how do you help to get this message down there? And then you talk about the private sector engagement platform that the AFCFTA has created. To what extent do you think your outfit can liaise with the PSC of the Secretariat and disseminate information down there?
That's a very important question, because I believe without information, we are standstill. So to have an outreach to all the private sector, we need this collaboration mechanism. So as Africa Business Council is structured, it's composed of the regional and continental private sector, which by itself is composed of the national chambers and the private sector organization. And we have clusters, for instance, for women entrepreneurs, where we bring women entrepreneurs, women in mining, women agriculture, even we have women in processing to come together to make this awareness. The youth, we have a program for the youth entrepreneurs and the startups of the continent. That's how you are having outreach to them. To the big companies even. The big companies, some of them even are not aware that how ACFTA could really change the whole Africa by bringing us together. The investment in certain sectors, it's very important. So for instance, we have under the energy, one of the big leading companies is chairing the energy cluster, how we invest in the energy across the continent, how we are investing in agro-processing. I always tell to my sisters here who are exhibiting, we have shea butter, you know, each one of them is coming alone to do a small quantity of shea butter. You know that we're exporting by shea butter by $90 million per year, while the cosmetic industry in the world that consists shea butter is over 500 million. So there is a huge gap. Again, we are exporting the cocoa beans with $5.7 billion, while the chocolate industry in the world is exceeding $217 billion. So where are we? Where are we from this? That's why I say that we need to have a mapping exercise of the existing structure in clusters and then have outreach to them, get them into corporates, and to make sure that we are having awareness for all the communities. And even we have a success story in Nigeria.
Yeah.
For instance, Nigeria, when we had our first CAMRAT, which is the Congress for Mineral Resources Development, the economic zone in Kaduna, they were only focusing on agriculture. When they attended the Congress for Mineral Resources, they said, oh, there is a huge opportunity with the mineral sector. Now, all their economic zone in Kaduna is now focused to see how they are able to support the small-scale miners and bring them to this economic zone to make industrialization and value addition. So this is how we really outreach to the private sector and leaving no one behind.
Great. And we were expecting that after the Guided Trade Initiative, the GTI, which meant that government and the AFCFTA guided the first reading as a pilot, as a proof of concept of the AFCFTA. We're hoping that the private sector will then take it up and continue from there. When is the private sector going to begin commercially meaningful trading without being guided? What can your team do to ensure that the private sector commends commercially meaningful trading without being guided? And what else are you waiting for?
So thank you very much. I think the private sector is not waiting. They are trying, but they need to see how they have business linkages. And that's why we have already organized 4 trade missions with the support of AfCFTA Bank to see how in Nigeria, in Zambia, here, we're going to Kenya for the COMESA Business Summit. So the private sector first need to know about each other, how they make business linkages, how they are vetted. Because again, when you don't know somebody, you need vetting, you need validation of your partner on the other side. So this again, Africa Business Council is trying to see how we really link private sector together. And there is also again success stories with reference to this coming from the west to the east, and to see how we invest. We have already, for instance, in investment in the health sector. The private sector are already signed in Zambia to start the first cancer treatment center, which again, health is a huge sector because it includes pharmaceuticals, vaccines, medical consumer supplies, trade with reference to the whole health sector. It's a huge sector like any other sector. So this will not happen except, again, if we do these business linkages, if we introduce together the private sector in a dialogue, which we already did, and then bring the private sector from each continent, from each part of the continent, to come together for a plan of action. Plan of action of what is needed, what are the projects that need investment. Here in Algeria, we were also again successful to meet with Algerian private sector who are already now into building 7 hospitals, where we bring also companies from Egypt to see how they can support in the medical equipments. So there is a lot of matchmaking program that we are doing together. But what we really need is to see that we have a hotline, because some, for instance, want to export to some parts like Tanzania. And there is a lot of issues that they can, for not only for logistics, but for tariffs and things like this, that we need a hotline. When we call, the private sector can call and say, we have an issue in this country. They are not really implementing the AfCFTA. We have an issue in this country because they are not executing the rules of the AfCFTA. So that's what we need, a hotline that the private sector can call, and they say, okay, this is not happening. How can the government solve it? You see? So we need to make awareness. We need to make reporting. We need to come together as private sector for the advocacy platform, because Africa Business Council, again, is the premier advocacy arm of the continent. We can talk to heads of states, to policy organs. And so we are hearing from the private sector. And not only the big private sector, but also we don't want to leave any gap. Yes, which is the backbone of our economy.
Yeah, but when you talk about reporting, what form should that take? Should it be done at the national level, or do you want the AFCFTA Secretariat to have the toll-free number? Who should be in charge? The various national secretariats, or who should be in charge?
But that's a very important. That's why I say there has to be a coordinating mechanism that at the level even of the Secretariat, or even at the level of the private sector, Africa Business Council, we need to have the private sector reporting, and then we have methods of communication with the national governments to tell them and to liaison with them that this is what's happening. Because if we don't do that, nobody will be aware of it. You see, so this is the issue of the awareness of the implementation of the laws, of the removal of all the tariffs and the non-tariff barriers.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Amany, for the good work that you are doing for private sector on the continent of Africa, and also the propagation of the message of the AFCFTA across the continent of Africa. We wish you well.
Thank you very much.